Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear viewers, we have been discussing the narrative in which Uthman radiallahu anhu in his own times exercised his judgment in placing Surah Anfal and Surah Tawbah together. He used his ijtihad, and we have gone through the text of the narrative and also gone through the criticism which arises on the text of the narrative, and we had also begun the chain of narration analysis, and we had seen how Yazid al-Farisi, one of the narrators of this narrative, fares, and how Abdul Latif Rahmani and Ahmad Shakir have presented evidence regarding the personality of Yazid al-Farisi. Today, inshallah, we hope to complete this topic, and the way we would go about it is that we'll continue discussing the chain of narration of this narrative the way we had started in the previous lecture, and then we shall find out how it stands to the test of historical criticism. Now, I would like to provide some further information regarding Yazid al-Farisi. So, just to recap, what we are doing now is we are actually discussing the chain of narration, and amongst this, within this chain of narration, we are discussing one narrator, and he is Yazid al-Farisi. And Yazid al-Farisi, about him, we have already found some initial information and discussed it in my earlier talk. But in this episode, I will complete this information and then see how the criticism on Yazid al-Farisi stands. So one additional piece of information that I'd like to give is that it was claimed in my previous lecture by our previous authorities that the only person present in the chain of narration is Yazid al-Farisi, and there's no other person who narrates this narrative. So this is not entirely accurate, and I would like to let you know and inform you that at least there are two other books in which a chain of narration has been recorded, in which instead of Yazid al-Farisi, we have Yazid al-Raqashi. In fact, in the Dalail al-Nabuwah of Al-Bayhaqi, the word is Yazid ibn al-Farisi, Yazid ibn al-Raqashi, which is apparently a tasheef. And in At-Tahawi's Shara Ma'an al-Athar, both these texts are being displayed before you. You can clearly see that instead of Yazid al-Farisi, the name mentioned is Yazid al-Raqashi. So this is an additional information. Now, it needs to be understood that we did read the comment of Tirmizi while he had, once he had finished recording this narrative, he had commented about the person of Yazid al-Raqashi as well, and I would like to read out that part again before you from Tirmizi so that we can see how Tirmizi himself has commented on this issue. So the words are وَيَزِيدُ الْفَارِسِ قَدْ رَوَى عَنْ ابْنِ عَبَّاسِ غَيْرَ حَدِيثٍ وَيُقَالُ هُوَ يَزِيدُ ابْنُ هُرْمُزٍ وَيَزِيدُ الرَّقَاشِي هُوَ يَزِيدُ ابْنُ أَبَّانَ الرَّقَاشِي وَلَمْ يُدْرِكْ ابْنَ عَبَّاسِ إِنَّمَا رَوَى عَنْ أَنَسِ بْنِ مَالِكٍ وَكِلَاهُمَا مِنْ أَهْلِ الْبَصْرَةِ وَيَزِيدُ الْفَارِسِ أَقْدَمُ مِنْ يَزِيدِ الرَّقَاشِي. So, in a comprehensive note, what Tirmizi has said is that sometimes people believe, there are some scholars who believe that Yazid al-Farisi is actually Yazid ibn Hurmuz. So this is one information that he has given. And the second information he has given is that he should not be confused with Yazid al-Raqashi, because, let me read out what he has actually said, and this will clarify to our viewers what exactly Tirmizi's view is in this regard. So he says that Yazid al-Farisi has narrated some narratives from Ibn Abbas, and it has been said that he is Yazid ibn Hurmuz. So this is one of his opinions. And Yazid al-Raqashi is in fact Yazid ibn Aban al-Raqashi, and he has not met Ibn Abbas. He has narrated from Anas ibn Malik, and both of them belong to Basra, and Yazid al-Farisi lived much earlier than Yazid al-Raqashi. So the distinction he is making here is that Yazid al-Raqashi is a person who lived much later than Yazid al-Farisi, and therefore the two must not be confused with one another. Yazid al-Raqashi is someone who narrates from Anas ibn Malik, and he does not narrate anything from Ibn Abbas. And we know that in this narrative, Yazid al-Farisi is actually narrating, Yazid is actually narrating from Ibn Abbas. So this is a very comprehensive note from Tirmizi, which tells us that Yazid al-Farisi has been regarded by some authorities to be Yazid ibn Hurmuz, and the fact that if some people think that he is the same as Yazid al-Raqashi, then they are gravely wrong, because Yazid al-Raqashi is someone who lived much later. In this regard, I think another thing is which also needs to be understood is that Yazid al-Raqashi himself is a very, very untrustworthy narrator. So if anyone insists that he is Yazid al-Raqashi and Yazid al-Farsi is the same as Yazid al-Raqashi, then an additional piece of information that I'd like to provide is that Yazid al-Raqashi has been regarded to be very weak and untrustworthy by Ibn Adi in his Al-Kamil fi Zurafa, by Ibn Habban in his Al-Majruhin, by An-Nasai, who has recorded him in his Zurafa, and by Ibn Hajar, who has recorded him in his Tehzib al-Tehzib. So this is how Yazid al-Raqashi himself is fares in our Rijal books, in our Rijal biography books. Now, as you would recall that Tirmizi had also made this comment that some people regard Yazid ibn Farsi to be Yazid ibn Hurmuz, and this is the opinion of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Abdul Rahman ibn al-Mahdi, and I have already cited this earlier on. What needs to be further understood is that if Yazid ibn Hurmuz is Yazid al-Farsi, then it needs to be understood that Yazid ibn Hurmuz has been regarded to be weak by al-Bukhari, and I have already cited that earlier in my previous talk. And I'm now going to add another comment by Abu Hatim, a very, very celebrated authority of Rijal, who himself regards Yazid ibn Hurmuz to be suspect. So, Az-Zahabi records in his Mizan al-I'tidal vis-a-vis Abu Hatim, Yazid ibn Hurmuz al-Madni al-Faqih, kaza sammahu Abu Hatim wa qala laysa biqawi. So Abu Hatim has called Yazid ibn Hurmuz a Madinite jurist and has said that he is laysa biqawi. So therefore, it needs to be understood that Yazid ibn Hurmuz is someone, if he is regarded to be Yazid al-Farsi, then he is a suspect person. So all in all, viewers, we can sum up this particular aspect of Yazid's identity by first of all identifying that he can be three people. He's Yazid al-Farsi, he could be Yazid al-Raqashi, and he could be Yazid ibn Hurmuz. Now, the fact that Yazid al-Farsi is Yazid ibn Raqashi, it is highly unlikely because of the comments of Tirmizi, which I have just narrated before you, because he lived much later on and he has not narrated anything from Ibn Abbas. And if Yazid al-Farsi is regarded to be Yazid ibn Hurmuz, then we have already seen that Yazid ibn Hurmuz is someone who is regarded to be weak by not only Imam Bukhari but also by Abu Hatim. So therefore, this is an aspect of weakness. And the third aspect in this regard is if Yazid al-Farsi and Yazid ibn Hurmuz are two distinct personalities, as is the opinion of Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan and Abu Hatim, then the weakness in Yazid ibn Farsi lies in the fact that the muhaddisun like Bukhari and Muslim have not accepted his narratives. So he is a person whose narratives have not been accepted if Yazid al-Farsi is regarded to be distinct from Yazid ibn Hurmuz. And we also need to gauge the fact that authorities like Ahmad ibn Shakir and Dr. Kalaji have regarded him to be weak. And viewers, I must also point out the view of Ibn Hajar in his Taqrib al-Tehzib. He says that Yazid al-Farsi is maqbool, and we know that in the terminology of Ibn Hajar, maqbool is a borderline case in the case of Ibn Hajar, because he is a person who does not narrate sufficient narratives, and if his narrations are corroborated by some other narrator, then he is called maqbool by Ibn Hajar. And if they are not corroborated, then he is regarded to be Layyinul Hadith. And perhaps Ibn Hajar is relying on the fact that his narration is corroborated by Yazid al-Raqashi, because Yazid al-Raqashi is a person who is present in some of the chains. But all in all, maqbool is a very, very borderline case vis-a-vis Rijal impugnation. So we can see that in summary that if he is Yazid al-Raqashi, then he is a person who is unreliable. If he is Yazid ibn Hurmuz, then he is also a person who is unreliable. And if he is none of these and he is Yazid al-Farsi is distinct, then the fact is that he is a borderline case as far as his authenticity and reliability is concerned, because Imam Muslim and Imam Bukhari have not accepted narratives from him, and the fact that Ibn Hajar regards him to be maqbool and Ahmad Shakir regards him to be majhool. So this is the overall jar on Yazid al-Farsi, and to me it is something which is very strong. Now viewers, let's move on to the next person in the line next person in line in the chain of narration, and he is Auf ibn Abi Jamila. And regarding Auf ibn Abi Jamila, Rahmani actually has posited that though the Muhaddisun have generally regarded Auf ibn Abi Jamila to be a trustworthy person, however, we find some more details on him. And these details Rahmani quotes on the authority of Ibn Hajar in his Tahzib al-Tahzib. So he says, وَحَقَلُ خَيْلِيًا عن ابن المبارك قال والله ما رضي عوف ببدعة واحدة حتى كانت فيه بدعتان قدري شيعي. وقال الأنصاري رأيت داود بن أبي هند يضرب عوفا ويقول ويلك يا قدري. وقال في الميزان قال بندار وهو يقرأ لهم حديث عوف لقد كان قدريا رافزيا شيطانا. Al-Uqayri narrates from Mubarak, he did not restrict himself to a single religious innovation. Instead, he was afflicted with two of them. He believed in determinism and was a Shiite. And Al-Ansari said, I saw Dawud ibn Abi Hind beating off and saying, cursed be you, O believer of determinism. And he is reported in Mizan al-I'tidal, and it is reported in Mizan al-I'tidal that Bundar, while narrating the hadith of Auf, told people that he believes in determinism, is a Rafizi and a devil. So Rahmani refers to the fact that both Imam Muslim in his introduction to his Al-Jami al-Sahih has actually at one time said that he is a trustworthy person, but later on he says that his narratives, or he is a person who is not as sound as some of the other narrators. So this incorporates a bit of weakness in Auf ibn Abi Jamila himself. And also another thing which Rahmani asserts is that since Auf ibn Abi Jamila is a Shiite, and since he is a person who is mujahid bil bid'ah, which is a term of the Muhaddisun, which means that a person who is guilty of religious innovation, if he narrates something which lends credence or lends support to his belief, then his narrative shall not be accepted. And he says that since in this narrative, the Tahrif al-Quran issue, or the issue of the fact that there was certain an element of judgment being exercised in placing the two surahs of the Quran together, which he says is something which is akin to Shiite methodology or Shiite inclinations. So therefore, a person who is himself a Shiite and who himself whose views actually are such that if we accept this narration from him, then his views that the Quran's arrangement has been tampered with will be lent support to. So therefore, he cannot be accepted. So this is what Rahmani has posited vis-a-vis Auf ibn Abi Jamila. Now, we also need to understand, viewers, that Auf ibn Abi Jamila, besides what Rahmani has said, there are some other blemishes as well, which I would like to point out, and I think I've pointed them out one of my very earlier talks, but I would also point them out again vis-a-vis Auf ibn Abi Jamila, given the importance of this narrative and the importance of the fact that how you have to judge this issue. So, first of all, it needs to be understood that Al-Uqayli has mentioned him in his book Al-Zu'afa, so which clearly tells us that he regards him to be weak. Now, next we come to Al-Hakim, and Al-Hakim actually reports the view of his teacher Al-Darqutni, because he has posed questions to Al-Darqutni, and Darqutni has replied in his famous book, Hakim's famous book, which is Su'alatul Hakim. The words are قُلْتُ فَعَوْفُ ibn Abi Jamila قال ليس بذاك. I asked, what about Auf ibn Abi Jamila? And Darqutni replied, Laysa bizaka. So Hakim posed this question to his teacher Darqutni, and he said, Laysa bizaka, which of course means that he is not that trustworthy. Al-Juzjani says in his Ahwal al-Rijal, Auf ibn Abi Jamila al-Arabi yatanawalo biyaminihi wa yasarihi min ra'i al-Basra wal-Kufa. Auf ibn Abi Jamila al-Arabi would carelessly accept narratives from his right and left from the opinion of the people of Basra and Kufa. Al-Mizzi also records a jarh on Auf ibn Abi Jamila, and the words from his Tahzib al-Kamal are قال بعضهم يرفع عمره إنه ليجيء عن الحسن بشيء ما يجيء به أحد, which means some of them are of the opinion that he is not trustworthy. He narrates from Al-Hasan that no one else ever has. So, in the presence of this data, viewers, we can clearly see that the jar on Auf ibn Abi Jamila is extremely well grounded. And prior to him, we've already discussed Yazid al-Farsi. So Yazid al-Farsi and Auf ibn Abi Jamila, both of whom are simultaneously present in the chains of narration of this narrative, both are weak narrators. So this is as far as the narrators are concerned. The second point that I'd like to bring before you vis-a-vis the weakness in this chain of narration is that Nasiruddin Albani has regarded this narrative to be weak as well. So he has written Zaif Sunan Abi Dawud in his famous book Zaif Sunan Abi Dawud, and he's shown that this, and he has categorized this narrative to be weak. Now, the third point worthy of consideration in this regard is that Ahmad Shakir points out that in the Bulaq edition of Tirmizi, the words quoted by Tirmizi are Hasanun Sahihun, and says that the addition Sahihun is incorrect. The word, we often find Tirmizi commenting on a narrative at the end, and he says that these words which are present, Hasanun Sahihun, they are incorrect, and they are incorrectly attributed to Tirmizi, because in the authentic traditions and in the manuscript of Tirmizi, the word Sahihun is not found. So the word which we find in the Bulaq edition of Tirmizi is Hasanun Sahihun. But he says that in the manuscript of Tirmizi, the word Sahihun is not found. The word present is just Hasanun. And in this regard, Ahmad Shakir refers to the edition edited by the Medina authority, Muhammad Abid as-Sindhi. It may also be pointed out that Bashar Awad al-Maruf has pointed out that the absence of this edition in the following three texts of Tirmizi. So besides the manuscript of Tirmizi, Bashar Awad says that there are further three texts in which this edition of Sahihun is also not present. And he says that in Tirmizi's, in Al-Mizzi's Tuhfatul Ashraf, the text which is published in Lucknow in India in 1892, and thirdly, the text published in Delhi in India in 1341 to 1353 Hijrah. In all these three, we do not find the addition of Sahihun present in the text, the way it is present in the Bulaq edition. Now, he also refers to the fact that As-Suyuti al-Munziri and the text of Tirmizi found in Abdur Rahman, Muhaddis Mubarakpuri's commentary on Sahih Tirmizi, have only the words Hasanun. So Ahmad Shakir says that only only the word Hasanun exists here, and the word Sahihun is not found there, which clearly tells us, viewers, that the addition of Sahihun, which we find today, is erroneously ascribed to Tirmizi, and which clearly brings down the narrative to the status of Hasan. Now, viewers, this is as far as the criticism on the chain of narration is concerned. I've filled in some blanks and some gaps to provide further information and conclude from this information that the chain of narration is weak in the opinion of Nasiruddin Albani, I've just pointed out, and the fact that two narrators are extremely weak. One of them is Yazid al-Farsi and the other one is of Ibn Abi Jamila. And we've also seen, seen that as far as the narrative itself is concerned, the correct ascription to it is Hasan. It is not a Sahih narrative, the way some editions of Tirmizi ascribe it. I've just spread out to you the details that in the more authentic editions and in the manuscript of Tirmizi, the word Sahihun is not present. Only the words Hasanun is present. Now, viewers, another point of criticism which I'd like to raise on the text of the narrative, in fact, there are 2 points I'd like to raise on the text of the narrative, is that this narrative in its own self is a gharib narrative. In the first 3 tiers of its transmission, we find single people narrating it. We find Abdullah ibn Abbas narrating it originally. From him, we find Yazid al-Farsi, and from him, we find Auf ibn Abi Jamila. So we find 3 tiers in which only a single person is present, which in technical parlance is called a gharib, and which in other words is a very, very severe defect in a narrative in which something is reported whose import was such, whose significance was such that it should have been reported by several people, because exercising judgment in placing surahs together is something which is questionable, because we know that the copying out phenomena which took place in the times of the Caliph Uthman was just copying out. And if he exercises judgment, then this should have been reported more pervasively by other companions. And in the presence of this situation in which just few people reported, and not only a single person reported from Uthman, but we find that there are subsequently two isolate and single persons reporting in the chain of narration, which of course is a very grave flaw in the matter of a chain of narration. And viewers, another point that I'd like to raise here is that this narrative also speaks of certain terms like the Masani, the Me'un, the Sabatwal. All these three terms, it looks as if they were well known the way they have been reported here. But I'm afraid, viewers, that we have nothing as to what exactly are the Sabatwal, because we have difference of opinion as to which the 7 long surahs were, then which are the Ma'in surahs, which are the Masani surahs. All of these 3 categories of surahs, which this narrative clearly mentions, tells us that they were perhaps well known in the time of the Sahaba. But in my research, I haven't found a single authority, including the Prophet, telling us anything about what these 3 categories of surah are. What exactly is the definition of a Me'un surah? What exactly is the definition of a Mathani or a Tawal surah? There are several opinions which differ with one another. We don't have any concerted, definite opinion either from the Prophet or from any of his companions, in the presence of which, of course, this narrative becomes a further enigma, because we don't know what exactly these words signify. So all in all, viewers, I would say that in the presence of all this criticism and in the presence of all these critical content which I have just put before you, this narrative is not worthy of being accepted because of this weakness, not only on its text, but also on its chain of narration, and I would reject it. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.